Everybody. Thank you for joining this talk, which is part of the YUFE D&I lecture series. My name is Karen Bush. I work at the University of Essex in the UK. My role there is Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm the strategic lead for diversity and inclusivity for the YUFE project. So I'm delighted today to welcome Dr. Clayton Hathway, who is going to talk to us today about the CASPER Project. Kate is a research fellow in gender equality and diversity with the Centre for Diversity Policy Research and Practice at Oxford Brookes University Business School in the UK. Kate has many years' experience as a qualitative researcher and is particularly interested in gender equality within organisational structures and promoting institutional change. Kate is a co-investigator for the CASPER Horizon 2020 project and part of the research team. So the idea is that Kate will talk for around about 40 minutes, and then that will give us around 20 minutes for a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I will be monitoring that and will be posing those questions to Kate at the end of her talk. Alternatively, you can just raise your hand at the end and we can have a discussion that way. But I think Kate would prefer if she's going to talk and then we'll do the questions at the end. So thank you very much, and it's over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and for those of you that have taken some time out of your busy days to come along and listen to my talk about the CASPER project. So CASPER stands for Certification Award Systems to Promote Gender Equality in Research. That's the only time I'll be saying it out in full. We've long been used to shortening it, and I will stick to that throughout the talk. Just to say that in terms of my background, I do have quite a bit of experience of evaluating gender equality activities and implementing them too, and I'm fortunate enough to have experience also in both departmental level and institutional level implementations of Athena Swan. So I come to it from that sort of angle, as well as being a qualitative researcher and having an interest in particularly in gender equality. CASPER is a EU project. We are part of at Brookes. We're part of a multinational consortium with partners from Belgium, Spain, Italy, Austria, France, and the Czech Republic. Really excellent group of partners, great consortium. We couldn't wish to be working with better people. The project was launched in January 2020 when we were still allowed to travel, and we met up in Strasbourg for the kickoff meeting. And that's the only time we've all been together in the same room. So all of the work I'm going to talk about today has all been carried out under COVID restrictions and all online. So we are looking forward to, at some point within the project, getting together in a room together, but are expecting that not to be for a little while. So we launched the project last year, the beginning of last year, and the key fieldwork took place initially over the summer of 2020, and then the follow-up fieldwork and the validation process that I'll be describing for you have taken place and are still actually ongoing. So we're actually we're still at a sort of a point past the midpoint, but still developing the project as I speak to you. So first of all, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the gender equality policy landscape to put things in context a bit. So we're looking now at, we've seen a couple of decades of gender equality policy in research and innovation, addressing problems such as too few women in science, slow career progress for women, underrepresentation in research decision making and at those sort of senior levels, and also a lack of gender perspective in teaching and research. So we are also hopeful, not least because the European Commission has been and is continuing to be a catalyst for change. So in particular, the announcement recently that gender equality plans are going to be a mandatory precondition for Horizon Europe funding, and the details on those have already are starting to emerge as we're here, as we're speaking. Also, to set some context, some trends in gender equality policy for research and innovation. There's been a move, and thankfully a move from fixing a problem at a level of individuals, so that old idea of kind of fixing the women and then the issues will go away, is moving more and more to, as we increase our understanding about a requirement to fix systems, so teams and organisations and institutions in their culture. This kind of move is also reflected in the objectives in the European research area priorities on gender equality and gender mainstreaming and research. And also, I think a trend that I can't not mention, I think is really important. The focus, expansion on the focus of sex and gender to incorporate a broader diversity perspectives and include intersectional approaches. And within CASPER, what we've aimed to do is to look at a gender plus approach. So we are focusing on gender, but also are mindful wherever possible of other intersections, such as with race and ethnicity, and also to move away from a gender binary. In terms of generally certification and accreditation systems in this area, there's been a number of years, 15 plus, of emerging systems. So these have predominantly been at national level rather. So the one that we will all know about as Athena Swan, which is a UK-based accreditation. But also has been taken up elsewhere, so in Ireland and moving further afield. So Australia has adopted the Athena Swan model and is adapting it for its own to its own kind of environment. There are other sort of smaller, if you like, awards such as Juno, which has a very specific disciplinary focus on physics, the Pleiades Awards in Australia, which focuses on astronomy, and then other national awards such as the Gender Equality Award in Norway, Total Equality Germany, and so on and so forth. Also, we can see that there are other types of certifications that aren't specifically aimed at just at gender or just at research. So the Catalyst Awards in the US and the EDGE certification and HRS4R, which has been particularly relevant for the work we're doing around CASPER, as I'll go on to talk about later. But so HRS4R, for example, is very specifically about human resources, so it doesn't reach out into those kind of areas of looking at better gender equality in research, for example. But something like HRS4R does operate at EU level, and so the Catalyst and EDGE certifications, they are international as well. So we actually, as part of the CASPER initial mapping, identified 114 certifications and accreditation systems, of which these are some of the key ones. So clearly there's a lot out there which we had to take into account in order to start and pull together the state of the art and understanding for CASPER. I wanted to, at this early stage as well, talk about what we mean by certification or award. So this was something that we had a number of discussions with right at the very beginning to get our terminology and our understanding consistent across the consortium, but also feed that out into the stakeholder base that we're going to be dealing with. So what we've come up with for CASPER is this acronym GCAS, which is Gender Equality Certification or Award Scheme, which is kind of a blanket term, if you like. What we've identified within this is that you will have awards which tend to be about past achievements, one-off, point in time, and something that's kind of a sort of finite and happens, and then that's it. So you would almost literally have an award ceremony for many of these. But we drew a comparison here with and made it distinct from certifications. So certifications we would see as assessing a process and the intentions of those processes. It would be progressive and ongoing, involving self-assessment, so data collection and interpretation of that data, putting in place an action plan, and implementation and evaluation of those actions. So a cycle whereby there would be constant improvement and then reassessment at some stage. Now, we do recognise that there is overlap between these two terms, and there is some confusion. For example, so Athena Swan calls itself an award, but we would consider the process that it is, and that is to be an actual certification. We do feel, and certainly the feedback that we've had from the fieldwork that we've done, is that both of these have their place. Both of them can be equal, maybe not equally, but certainly both of them we feel could have a place in taking forward an EU-wide certification or award, or GCAS, as I'll try to call it. So onto the CASPER project itself. So we had a number of overall aims with the project. Firstly, it was to examine the feasibility of establishing a pan-European award or certification system. It specifically aims at gender equality in research organisations. So the consultation that we've done has gone out to both research performing organisations, RPOs, and also RFOs, research funding organisations, and also within the consultation we've gone out to private companies. So I mentioned Edge certification, for example. That's a private sector certification, but nevertheless our aim in terms of the development of this, if you like, an EU-wide product is primarily on gender equality in research organisations. And we were tasked with devising alternative scenarios and options that were to be co-created by both national and international stakeholders, and based on an assessment of the existing relevant systems. So pinning it down to the kind of main objectives that we have. Firstly, and this is the kind of the process that we've gone through in terms of this is a research and consultation exercise. Firstly, we needed to map and assess what existing award and certification systems there were out there already. And so that was, I'll describe the methodology and the methods that we use shortly. But the first exercise was a big mapping right across Europe of what's out there already. And through that and through consultation, then we were to distill a set of prerequisites. So a set of components, if you like, that would be essential should a European award be and certification be introduced. So we had to come up with these prerequisites. So using those prerequisites, then the next task we had was to design 3 different award and certification scenarios and assess the feasibility of those scenarios. In addition to look at what would happen if there was no action. So if the Commission said, actually, you know, we've looked at the idea of having a European certification, but for whatever reasons that's not going to work, what would happen if we do nothing and if we just carry on the course that we've chosen? And then the final part of our objectives was to prepare the grounds for a successful rollout of an award. So not actually to, our job within CASPER isn't to say, right, this is the one you're going to choose and this is how we're going to do it. The CASPER project actually stops at the stage where we've come up with the scenarios, we've done sufficient validation and consultation work to be able to really give the Commission a good idea about what all of the pros and cons and what sort of reaction each of the different scenarios would would elicit, and also to prepare the ground in terms of having a base of people, of stakeholders, of experts who were aware of this project and were kind of ready and waiting to help the Commission to take it to the next stage. So our job is more to develop the proposals and to come up with the policy recommendations, but not to conduct any selection or implementation. So just to sort of to position where the CASPER project is. So how to go about this mammoth task? Well, we initially started with a group of national researchers who basically looked at every one of the member states and including the UK, even though by this time we weren't a member state. I will just say it was a massive spreadsheet. It was a fantastic spreadsheet with basically all of the different types of accreditation, certification, award that related to gender equality. And within that, we were quite broad in this initial kind of sweep, if you like, to look at, there are some small accreditations in some countries where perhaps it just is looking at work-life balance or just looking at childcare provision. We included all of that. And that then gave us the kind of the info and the basis to put together a stakeholder database. So we were able to identify the different schemes that exist, and then that meant that we could actually start to go to the people who ran the schemes, as well as people who ran and designed the schemes, as well as the actual users. So people, for example, in the UK at universities who are implementing Athena Swan. In the bottom right hand corner of my slide, actually, it does talk about the different sorts of stakeholders. So the kind of people that we were talking to, people running or managing the schemes, I've said, so actually the kind of the architects and the people who own and run Athena Swan, using Athena Swan as an example. Then stakeholders who are using a scheme. So that would be the universities, the RPOs. We did also involve, though, stakeholders with no involvement in the scheme, who were kind of policy makers or gender experts who'd never actually implemented a scheme, but would have more of a contextual view of the impacts of such schemes, even though they weren't an institution that was implementing one. We talked to a small number of stakeholders who actually at EU policy level, and a couple also with who were involvement in a scheme, but also had policy making and gender expertise. So we got a broad mix. We actually did 67 interviews with 74 participants, because for some institutions a couple of people sat in. We primarily concentrated on higher education institutions, and as well as the sort of key stakeholders I've already described. But we also went to, as I said, I've already mentioned EDGE certification, but we spoke to Stonewall, and we spoke to a couple of other sort of private certification and award organisations to get a really good broad idea about the kind of pitfalls, the sorts of processes in place. And it was actually really helpful to step outside of just the higher education sector to get some ideas about how things might be done in slightly different ways. In terms of the interviews that we did, we interviewed across 31 different certification and award systems, and went as far abroad as far away as Australia and the US, as well as a considerable number of European member states and the UK. So quite an intensive, over the last summer, an intensive exercise to gather together all of this information. If anybody's got any questions about the sort of specifics of how we did that, then we can perhaps save that to the end, so I can cover all of the other detail that I think you'll be interested in. So some of the key issues that were coming out, obviously we had a huge amount of information, but there were some really strong emerging themes, and I just wanted to kind of, I'll drill down into those a little bit in the next few slides. So in terms of what we could learn from the existing schemes, these were key areas and consequences that kept coming up. I'd like to call them kind of the flashpoints. Firstly, the administrative burden of some of the existing schemes was top of everybody's list in terms of you know, the universally they were felt to be a good idea, but also they're highly, you know, quite burdensome, and the significance of support. And I will actually say a little bit about support and the sort of support that institutions felt that they would need, you know, if we had an ideal world going forward. Some of the kind of ideas about what were the enablers and drivers of actually going for certification award in the first place. You know, what are the incentives here? Again, I'll pick up on that a little bit. Some of the and it was another common theme was the academic engagement in these certifications, and often felt that it was difficult to get that academic engagement that quite a lot. And this was across a number of the different types of certification that that you could kind of get it picked up in HR, you could get it picked up by equality and diversity individuals, but actually getting it out into the faculties was much more difficult, and that was felt to be quite universal. There were some issues around the consistency of evaluation. So a number of different ways of evaluating the gender equality in institutions, but it was felt that this wasn't always done consistently within particular certifications. Quite a lot of discussion around the pros and cons of quantitative versus qualitative approaches, and the difficulties of collecting some of that data, how time consuming some of it is, but also you know, the need to combine the two, and not all of the certifications and awards that we looked at did that. A concern that impact wasn't being measured as it might be, that quite a lot of existing awards concentrate on process, and you know, we've all heard these words tick box so many times, but that was just a concern that a lot of certifications, or a lot of elements of certification, really focused on process without measuring impact, or without going far enough to measure impact. And also concerns about unintended consequences, one of which has been well researched, and or certainly has been researched, maybe not widely yet, but the amount of work that falls on the shoulders of women in particular, that you know, that these certifications are a great idea, and they do really move things on, but that conversely they also really impacted on the women staff in particular. In terms of discussing and trying to look at the elements of a Europe-wide scheme, there were a number of as we developed the discussions, there were clearly a why, a what, a how, and a who in terms of what we should be thinking about. So under the, I'll just sort of briefly go through these, and if again we can drill down again in questions if anybody has any. But in terms of, you know, why would anybody want to even think about taking part in a new scheme, in a Europe-wide scheme? So for additional support, for benchmarking and visibility, and incentives came up quite a lot. You know, the fact that, you know, and this has been very successful, of course, with Athena Swan, in terms of there being funding linked to having the Athena Swan accreditation. what would we be looking at in what would a Europe-wide scheme actually include? So is the focus on gender or is it on diversity? That came up a fair bit. Are we focusing on processes or outputs? And another question that came up was whether, and that we asked was whether a scheme would be better if it was a general scheme or whether it was subject specific. So should it focus on sciences only, or should there be different elements of it that focus on particular disciplines, for example? How it's implemented, there were quite a few questions around that, and how it would be measured, so self-assessment, external review, peer review. Would some elements of it be mandatory? This is, if you're thinking that there's going to be a Europe-wide scheme, would the Commission make it mandatory for certain requirements to be rolled out, or should it be voluntary? The importance, again, that kind of theme coming up about qualitative and quantitative indicators. Should there be a progressive approach? So in the way that Athena 1 has a bronze, silver, gold, and you can have one and stay where you are, or you can preferably there would be incentives to progress. And how time bound would it, are we going to be asking people to renew this every year, renew this every 5 years, and how would that work? And the who as well. Should it be, as we said, as I said at the beginning, we were looking specifically at research performing organisations.